Welcome to the Cosmic Busker. My name is Bobby Cody. In this video, this is Ancient Mars Civilization, a Timeline of Discovery, Part 4. In this video, we're going to be taking a look at a news conference. The news conference was convened, it was May 8th, 2001 at the Hotel New York, or I believe that's in Washington, D.C., maybe New York, New York. I'm pretty sure that's Washington, D.C. I'm almost positive about that. The two featured speakers at this news conference were Dr. Tom Van Flandern. He's a former Chief Astronomer at the U.S. Naval Observatory, and Dr. Brian O'Leary. Dr. Brian O'Leary was former Apollo astronaut who was slated to be the first man on Mars before NASA, for some reason, canceled the Mars mission to put a man on Mars. What they're going to be talking about is evidence of ancient Mars civilization. Anybody who has seen the first three parts of my Ancient Mars Civilization series and watches this will recognize various conclusions that I have come to are also restated here by these two eminent scientists, Dr. Tom Van Flandern and Dr. Brian O'Leary. However, they stated a little better than I do because they are much more versed in their fields than I'm versed in their fields. I'm just a layman after all. So what I'd like to do is first cut to the introduction. The introduction that Dr. Brian O'Leary does. Once again, he's a former Apollo astronaut. He was slated to be the first man on Mars. He also worked on the Mariner 10 project, as we will probably later see, depending on the clips that I show you in this video. So let's cut to Dr. Brian O'Leary. And I should say rest in peace to both gentlemen. They have since passed away. This was in 2001. I'm recording this in 2019, so it's 18 years later. They both have since passed away. Let's cut to Dr. Brian O'Leary, where he gives an introduction to this subject matter real quick.
Introduce Dr. Brian O'Leary.
Thank you, Michael. I normally don't read statements, but I think I'm going to start reading this one. Science is going through a major revolution. There's no question about it. We are living in exciting times, in spite of what government agencies might tell you. And probably in no area has there been more misunderstanding than in the area of the search for extraterrestrial intelligence. Whenever anybody embarks on this search, there seems to be great controversy, great misunderstanding. And yet, more than 2 decades of responsible research by investigators outside of NASA on this object, the so-called face on Mars, have revealed very strong evidence, not yet proof, that this object and other objects nearby were artificially constructed. And yet NASA and its contractors have shown no interest in these objects and have obfuscated the research. History is full of examples of denial and suppression of new ideas by the establishment. We have Galileo, Copernicus, Bruno, the Wright brothers, and so forth. In each case, the conventional wisdom was reversed by the investigations of courageous outside researchers who have risked their careers and sometimes their lives to seek the truth rather than to be politically correct. My colleague, Dr. Tom Van Flandern, is one example. I have known Dr. Van Flandern for nearly 40 years and can attest to the thoroughness and integrity of his research. During the 1960s, we were graduate students together at Georgetown University. Tom went on for his PhD at Yale. I went on for my PhD at the University of California in Berkeley. Then I was appointed by NASA to be the first astronaut to Mars. Unfortunately, the Mars program was canceled at that point. Tom and I each pursued mainstream careers in astronomy research, publishing dozens and dozens of peer-reviewed papers in our fields until the 1980s, when we independently began to address promising but unsupported topics, such as the Mars anomalies. In 1976, the Mars Viking orbiter imaged a mile-long mesa that resembles a human face staring straight up into space. The spacecraft also imaged other objects of interest in the surrounding areas. This began a 25-long period of scientifically inappropriate actions, including the initial denial of a second corroborating image of the Cydonia face, the use of improper optical algorithms and filters on the high-resolution face image for example, the initial Mars Global Surveyor photograph, holding back or delaying the release of images from the public, and providing premature negative interpretations of their possible artificiality. Also, we have seen in NASA a lack of cooperation with qualified outside investigators, including campaigns to discredit the inquiry, the refusal by mainstream scientific journals to even consider and review papers, let alone publish them, and NASA's failure to re-image the face and surroundings under proper circumstances when occasions arose. Collectively, these activities violate NASA's own charter as an open civilian agency accountable to the public. The main casualty in all of this has been the truth. How could this have happened? Perhaps NASA and its contractors and other agencies are following a secret policy to deny evidence for extraterrestrial intelligence, pursuant to a 1961 Brookings Institution report recommending non-disclosure to the public. Regardless, sufficient evidence has been gathered to warrant a public outcry to get to the truth of the matter. Through the years, Dr. Van Flandern, the Society for Planetary SETI Research, and I have published significant scientific evidence for artificial structures on Mars. In the presentation you're about to hear, Dr. Van Flandern will be showing you some provocative images from the ongoing Mars Global Surveyor mission. Some of the images should not be regarded as definitive scientific evidence, but rather as further indicators of what could turn out to be one of the most significant discoveries of our time. The public needs to know about the evidence being presented and the depth of the extraordinary collision between the old and new paradigm. No important question has been more maligned or more controlled than whether or not we're alone in the universe. It's time to get to the bottom of the story. Tom?
It's time to get to the bottom of the story, that's right. Dr. Brian O'Leary was proposed to be the first man on Mars before they canceled the mission to Mars. He stated those words 18 years ago. It is now time. I've already covered a video about scientists who have published the first peer-reviewed paper to make it through a peer review, stating that they have found life on Mars in the form of mushroom or fungus on Mars. I'll provide a link to it up there so you can take a look at it. But I want to go back to this same news conference, 2001 news conference. We're going to go now to Dr. Tom Van Flandern. And Dr. Tom Van Flandern is going to present what he terms structures that are pictures from Mars, from the Mars Global Surveyor, that fall in the general category of, if we saw them on Earth, we would conclude that they were the activity of either humans or large-scale biological activity. So with these photos he's going to show you now at this 2001 news conference, if we saw these on Earth, we'd say it's either humans or life, some type of large life. So let's cut to each one of these little clips that Tom Van Flandern shows this news conference.
Any of the other moons or planets of the solar system that we have imaged to date. The object on the left has a T shape, which is obviously pretty rare. That and perfect triangles are rarely seen in nature. and are not the result of normal processes. The craters on the right, I'm calling them craters in a general sense because that's the appearance they have, but actually craters on the moon and planet surfaces are not formed by excavation when something hits it. They are formed by an energetic explosion when something hits it at extremely high speeds, as anything striking these bodies must be. The gravity fields guarantee a minimum speed high enough to vaporize completely the impacting object. So the crater is formed by explosion, and therefore to find a flat-bottom, high-walled crater, that can't happen from an explosion. Likewise, to have a crater, the shape of the elongated object there cannot happen from impact either. You can get a slightly elliptical crater, but not something.
So that T-shape looked to me like a building. Excuse me. And to the right there, we had what Dr. Tom Van Flandern called a crater that isn't a crater. Next, we're going to take a look at probably one of the most fascinating structures that have been found other than the face on Mars. These are what are termed, the glassy tubes. These glassy tubes are, I think they say they're like 1,000 meters, I think they called them, long, but that's just a part that you can see above ground because they go underground. The rest continues underground. Some type of subway system, some type of water conveying system, something. We'll go to Dr. Tom Van Flandern right now, and he's going to show these glassy tubes that they found on Mars and go into a little bit of more detail about them.
The next picture is in a different category of glassy tubes. The glassy tubes are seen in dozens of places. Since we've sampled only 1/1000th of the surface of Mars so far at high resolution, they must be all over the place. They are networked. We've established that it is not an optical illusion. They are really tube-shaped. They are not easily explained as dunes or lava tubes. They seem to be translucent. In fact, in this case, that bright spot seems to be a specular reflection of the sun, implying that the surface must be glassy or metallic. Natural surfaces don't ordinarily give you specular reflection.
Now, as I stated before, scientists had just recently, now here in 2019, finally proposed a paper where they think they found life on Mars. The fact is, 18 years ago, we believe we found life on Mars. We could have proven it easily if NASA had bothered to try to prove it. They haven't and didn't. So we're going to cut to what we appear to be trees on Mars. Remember, this is the Mars Global Surveyor. It's going in orbit, so it's taking photographs of Mars from up above. So what Dr. Tom Van Flandern is going to show us right now are photos of trees from above. These trees appear to be as wide as 100 meters in diameter. Let's take a look at what Dr. Tom Van Flandern has to say.
This is an object, one of several in this area, which if we saw it on Earth, we would say, well, that's a tree seen from above. But Mars is supposed to be a lifeless planet. Yet we see the radial structure around a central trunk. We can see several levels of branching. We can see shadows cast on the ground. These are clearly not on the ground geologically. They are above it, casting shadows downward. This is one of the images that led Arthur Clarke to say he's 95% certain that Mars has large life on it.
So here you see Dr. Tom Van Flandern, 18 years ago, astronomer from U.S. Naval Observatory, the Chief Astronomer from U.S. Naval Observatory, stating 18 years ago, better than 99% certain that Mars had large life in the form of the trees we just saw. No scientific publications would cover this at all. It's taken 18 years before finally they agreed one paper to be published that there was fungus from mushrooms on Mars, as I've done a video about and I've showed you a link about before. Now we're going to take a look at infrastructure on Mars. We've already gone over in previous videos face on Mars, pyramids on Mars. Now here are triangle shapes, a whole bunch of them all over the place, all grouped together. Let's take a look.
Vegetation on the planet. Here's the category of infrastructure, and I showed this one out of several because triangle shapes require a special explanation, and here there's so many of them so similar. And even if those are shadows, you still have an unusual number of monoliths, large monoliths, all of the same size and shape. Not only that, but they are organized, not randomly placed at all, but there are long curved arcs on both sides there, and they tend to be lined up in the horizontal direction.
Okay, the last part of this series, I took a close look at the Cydonia area and the work of Richard Hoagland. And I happened to mention that this Cydonia area, I showed the city looking at the face, and I stated that this had once been the equator. Well, here's Dr. Tom Van Flandern going over that same thing with a better graphic than I provided in my last video. So let's take a look at that right now.
There, and they tend to be lined up in the horizontal direction. This is a return to our old friend, the Cydonia face on Mars, but there are two new things we've learned about it. One is that one of the arguments that it's probably natural is that it's can only be seen from above, and yet it was tilted at an angle and it's at no special place on the planet. However, the white line shows the old equator of Mars prior to the large pole shift that Mars experienced at an unknown time, but probably dated to 3.2 million years ago. And before that pole shift, the face on Mars, interestingly, was right on the Mars equator and oriented upright, both indicators that it was a built object. In addition to that, it's three-dimensional nature, and the fact that here we see only half of a face in the original Discovery photos. Computer enhancements of these 1976 images, such as on the left here, have brought out some detail on the right, and we can see that it's not just half a face.
Now we're going to take a look at what Tom Van Flandern and the team of computer specialists did. They essentially took what was known about the face, and they, with no other input, they just said, here's the photos, throw it into a computer, and have the computer judge the light analysis of these photos of the face on Mars, which we've talked about in previous videos. And based on the light analysis of the different photos, come up with a 3D rendering of the face on Mars. Wait till you see this. It's fascinating.
By any artist. It is just rearranging the features you see by computer instructions to restore a high angle of lighting, put the shadows in the right place, and to restore an overhead view from this oblique view to one side. And here's what happens when we do that. There's the lighting restored, and now we rotate to a view from above. And this is what the object actually looks like, as best we can tell at this point. So both the other scientific arguments and the new view of the face certainly have our attention with regard to perspective artificiality of this object, but there is more. In this image, to the amazement of everyone, including the scientists involved who made these predictions, we can see two nostrils at the end of the nose, we can see an iris inside the eye socket, we can see an eyebrow feature over the eye socket, we can see that the mouth does consist of parted lips. All of those predictions that were made in advance to distinguish artificial from natural were fulfilled in favor of an artificial or built object in this image. Moreover, they are fulfilled in a most interesting way, because There is no background of similar features from which we can pick and choose the ones that fit our preconception of a face. So,
I want to go over what aspect of that real quick. It's just fascinating. Now, prior to running that computer simulation with the light to get a 3D rendering, what they had predicted is that it's a face on Mars. They said, okay, it's a face on Mars. When we get a better look at it, we will expect to find further evidence that it's a face. Eyeballs, nostrils on the nose, teeth in the mouth, etc., etc. So then they run the computer analysis with the lighting to get a 3D rendering. What does the 3D rendering come up with? Comes up with, the mouth, teeth in the mouth, an eyebrow, iris in the eyes, nostrils in the nose. That wouldn't show up unless it really was a face. I mean, these are, you come up with the prediction first, and then you say, okay, let's see if further evidence hits the prediction right on. They run essentially a simulation to judge the mathematical possibilities of this being natural versus artificial. It's 1,000 billion to 1 that it is an artificial construction. 1,000 billion to 1. For all you gamblers out there, you know what that means. You'll take the odds that it's artificial every time. This isn't a natural object. Now, I'd suggest to you, I'm going to provide a link down below so you can see this whole video. It's on UFO TV on YouTube. I highly suggest you watch it. Tom Van Flandern talks about Mars as his hypothesis is that Mars was once a moon of a planet that exploded. I'll give a link up there to what I've done with the exploding planet hypothesis. It also talks about in this same video, I posted the link down below, about a second face on Mars. It's a feminine face. Also in this same video again, he talks about what they found are letters and symbols in the surface of Mars, carved into the surface, somewhat similar to the Nazca lines that we know of in Peru. Finally, what I want to do is cut to final summary that Dr. Tom Van Flandern talks about. He says, beyond a reasonable doubt, there was an ancient civilization on Mars. Forget about life on Mars. Yeah, we know there's life on Mars. Regardless of what scientists may say, the evidence is overwhelming. Not only is there current life on Mars, but there was an intelligent civilization beyond a reasonable doubt. If this went to court, any good lawyer could prove it. Let's hear Dr. Tom Van Flandern talking about that right now.
the remaining short lifetime of the spacecraft.
Sir, you're aware, and you've even said that there is, in large part, ridicule and or denial. How would you tell the layperson in that 20 seconds you'll get on TV what it is you believe did or does exist on Mars?
I would say that in an examination of the images we now have, there are 67,000 of them, of which we have examined several thousand in close detail. We've turned up anomalies so unlikely to be products of nature, and in some cases fulfilling a priori predictions and having relationships and contexts that support artificiality, that the conclusion that there are artificial structures on Mars is now beyond a reasonable doubt.
To the skeptic who says, I won't believe it until the government tells me.
All right, the final part of this news conference that we're going to cover, then we're going to go to one other independent researcher. We're going to take a look at his work real quick. But first, I just want to go to Dr. Brian O'Leary. He summarizes this news conference by talking about the cultural context in this. He talks about how political correctness is going to lead to our doom, and how we're not going to, it's in order to find the truth, we can't have political correctness. We have to be brave and courageous and be able to speak the truth. Freedom of speech is important Political correctness will destroy our freedoms, our freedom of speech, and our ability to find the truth. He talks about how, he was within the scientific community. He was a Mariner, worker on the Mariner 10 NASA project. He was very, very involved with NASA until he didn't even say that, this is true that there's life on Mars or there's structure on Mars. All he had to say was, we really need to take a look and see if there are these structures on Mars or if there's life on Mars. And boom, he's gone. They didn't even, don't even permit you to, or didn't even permit you to inquire as to whether there was life on Mars or structure on Mars. As soon as you talk about it, they're like, you're gone, you're out of here, goodbye. That is in essence political correctness. That's what political correctness does. That's what policing free speech or policing speech does. You have to have the ability to speak freely if you're going to arrive at the truth. Let's hear what Dr. Brian O'Leary has to say right now, because it's very important not only to this field of inquiry, but in particular, more so ever than before, what we have going on in 2019 right now, where people are trying to police speech and put a political correctness context on everything that happens, regardless of whether it's true or not. Truth has to be one of your highest values, along with freedom of speech and the rights of the individual. Let's go to Dr. Brian O'Leary right now, finishing off this news conference.
So we'll keep looking.
Brian has something he wants to add.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting question because you have to look at the cultural context of what's been going on. For 25 years now, we've had this face image, and yet NASA has been totally ignoring it. Most of the people that are on the investigation teams that have been funded by NASA, and I used to be on one of the teams, I was on the Mariner 10 team. I was deputy team leader of the Mariner 10 Venus-Mercury mission. Mike Malin, who's in charge of the imaging for the Mars Global Surveyor, was a graduate student then. He basically worked for me. And since I began to give credibility to the inquiry, not necessarily the result, then all of a sudden I was out. Not one penny from NASA, not one acknowledgement. This is what's happening culturally. And if you understand that, then you begin to see the pattern. The geologists on the Mars Global Surveyor team look at Mars through geological colored glasses. So they're going to be looking for canyons and signs for water erosion and so forth and so on. Whereas some of us outside of NASA have culturally coalesced, admittedly in a kind of an ad hoc way because we haven't been organized or funded for any of the work. And so if you look at it from that point of view, you begin to understand how it might be that these investigations actually are every bit as credible as the ones that happen within NASA. It's just culturally different.
Sam.
It's an important point. The type of top-down control of the truth where they try to suppress the truth in favor of a politically correct view of things is essentially what happens, in my opinion, based on the evidence with climate change. There's billions and billions and billions of dollars that is thrown into the climate change scientific arena. And those at the top of the climate change hierarchy want those billions to continue. So in order for those billions to continue, they have to promote the anthropogenic climate change scenario. However, if you talk to individual scientists, there is far from unanimity. It is very, very questionable whether humans are causing global climate change. There's no question we do cause some local change in climate. That's not a debate. The debate is whether we have an effect globally, and that is very, very unlikely, and all the evidence says we don't. But regardless of that, I want to go to Joseph P. Skipper. May he rest in peace. He passed away as well. He passed away, I believe it was in 2018. I'm going to provide a link down below to his website. It's called Mars Anomaly Research. He has been looking at the tens of thousands of photos of Mars that the Mars Global Surveyor produced. And he has found evidence of cities, evidence of lakes, evidence of trees, as we have seen previously. So I'm just going to go over a few of the photos and what they show real quick, and I'll provide a link down below to Joseph P. Skipper, rest in peace, his Mars Anomaly Research website. Let's go to those photos right now. Here we have from the Mars Anomaly Research website, trees on Mars. This is essentially the Mars Global Surveyor looking down on treetops. Here we have the Mars Global Surveyor satellite looking down at a forest with lakes. You can see the lakes obviously on the right and the upper left. Here we have more forests and lakes on Mars. You can also see an island there on the left. Here we have a city on Mars. Almost certainly an ancient city, but you can see the grid-like structure. Look at all the geometry there, the squares, the rectangles. That's what archaeologists on Earth look for when they're looking for cities. If you look closely, you can see roads, buildings, structures. This is or was a city. For those who want to do further research on this, this is called, the city is in Gale Crater on Mars, Gale. Here we have another look at Gale Crater, another section. You can see all the geometry there. And here we have a structure on Mars. This is a side look. You can see the structure. All right, to summarize really quickly, and in the beginning of the video, preponderance of our video today, we took a look at the news conference from 2001 with Thomas Van Flandern and Brian O'Leary, where they presented abundant evidence of structures on Mars, even in trees on Mars. And what I just showed you essentially was Joseph P. Skipper's website, Mars Anomaly Research. He downloads Mars Global Surveyor photographs. He's done work with tens of thousands of these photos. He's found trees, lakes, cities. I highly suggest taking a look at his website. The amount of evidence for all this is abundant and overwhelming. And as Dr. Thomas Van Flandern stated, the odds are 1,000 billion to 1 that there was an ancient civilization on Mars. So if anybody is a gambler and they wants to see if Las Vegas is taking any bets on this, you got some great odds, regardless of what Las Vegas is giving you, because there was an ancient civilization on Mars, and it destroyed itself. I have a video on that too. Everybody have a great day. I'm going to be posting part 5 pretty soon, and part 5 is going to essentially look at the most recent Curiosity rover and some of the photos that I've found, which are wow. Everybody have a great day. Thanks for watching.